ladies and gentlemen, welcome. There's just a couple of folk outside, but I do have a few little announcements to make. So by the time I'm finished, they'll probably have made their way in. Thank you for joining us. A number of you might have been here for our Hymn Fest just, I don't know how many, about 3 months ago, I think it was. And it's great that a number of you have returned. There are a few people who weren't here then. So essentially it's a sing-along today, and we'll be singing a whole bunch of favourite carols. Just one or two that you may not be as familiar with, but of the 19 that we're singing, you'll be relieved to know we're not singing every verse. Of the 19 that we're singing, about 17 will be very, very well known by all of you, I'm sure. And the other two might be known by some of you anyway. So I'd like to welcome those who are joining us online. There'll be some people watching us live as we go to air. There will be other people who will be watching, and I'll show that link at the end, and that's one of the ways you can get to, if you enjoy the program today, you can watch it again, or you can invite your friends to watch it again. Same with the Hymn Fest, which is still available online. Because of ticketed and allocated seating, we do just ask that you sit in the seats that have been allocated to you and not move elsewhere, but we'll remain seated for most of the time. We'll stand at least for the last carol, which is Joy to the World. But if at any time you feel like standing up and singing, you're very welcome to do so, but we're not expecting you to do that. In the very unlikely event of some kind of emergency, please follow directions of the church folk, but our assembly point is outside the house next door on the footpath just there. If you have your mobile phone like me, and I'm just going to triple check that I've turned mine to silent at least. Yes, I have. Please, it would be great if you could have your phone either off or on silent. And at the end of the service too, I'll tell you about our Christmas services, but of course many of you are members of other churches, so just a reminder that that's another opportunity to sing your favourite carols will be at your local church's Christmas services. Well, I think that's pretty much it, and I notice that the folk who are outside have come in, so let's begin. John Francis Wade made his living copying manuscripts by hand, and he became famous for his artistic calligraphy. Because he sometimes copied music as well, scholars have been unsure whether he actually wrote O Come All Ye Faithful or merely translated it. But I remember singing years ago in a choir at the annual Capella Christmas carols. Our guest singer was Barry Crocker, and he, strangely enough, given his reputation, didn't want to sing verse 2 of this first carol, O Come All Ye Faithful, because it mentions the Virgin's womb, and he called it the gynecological verse. But I've included verse 2 because it speaks of the great theme of Christmas, the gift of God as one of us, born to a human mother just like us. And so we'll sing 4 of the 8 verses of that hymn today. Our second carol, Good Christians All Rejoice, is a very old hymn. Originally in Latin, it's been around for at least 600 years. By 1601, it had been translated into German, and in the 18th century, Bach wrote both an organ arrangement of the music and also a choir arrangement. For over 250 years, it has been sung in many languages. It's reported that in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, in 1745, a gathering of Moravian missionaries sang this carol in 13 different European and Native American languages. But we begin with O Come All Ye Faithful.
Cecil Francis Alexander wrote a number of hymns to illustrate and teach the Apostles' Creed. The Apostles' Creed is a summary of the Christian faith, which goes back to the 2nd century, 100 and something AD. All Things Bright and Beautiful was written to illustrate the part of the Creed which says that God is the creator of heaven and earth. Our next carol, Once in Royal David City, was also written by Alexander, illustrates the part of the Creed which says Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary. As Andrew said, of O Come All Ye Faithful, a central idea of the Christian faith is that God truly became one of us in Jesus and knows by experience what it is to be human. So much so that in Jesus, God feels for our sadness and shares in all our gladness. We'll sing the first 3 verses of this carol. When you think of the police, you probably do not think of carol singers wandering the streets, singing on Christmas Eve and Christmas night. But this carol was originally sung by the watchmen of London. Over the years, they changed from being simple night watchmen, sounding the hour with a musical instrument, to being town musicians who kept watch and also played for civic occasions. At Christmas time, the tradition arose that they would sing carols to add to the festivities and also earn a little drinking money to add to their own celebrations. Both the original, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, and the modern inclusive version we sing, God Rest You Merry People All, are not addressed to merry gentlemen or merry people. Instead, the night watch are telling us that all people, men, women, and children, can rest merry or have a relaxed and joyful Christmas night and eve because Jesus Christ our Saviour was born on Christmas Day. We'll start with Once in Royal David City.
Thank
with Silent Night, Away in a Manger is surely one of the best loved of all Christmas carols. It's a lullaby written from the point of view of a child imagining the baby Jesus asleep in the hay in a feed trough or a manger. The child also knows that the baby Jesus is the one who, as God's Son and as a grown-up, cares for us and makes us fit for eternal life. The following carol, Mary's Child, may not be so well known. Written in 1959 in the UK, it's in the New Australian Hymn Book Together in Song, but has been sung in Australia since the 1980s. It's a beautiful, simple song which somehow manages to bring together the whole meaning of the birth, life, death and new life of Jesus in just 4 verses. First we sing Away in a Manger.
Away
Now, many of you will know the story of Silent Night. Just before Christmas in 1818, in a small Austrian village, the organ had broken down. The local priest, Joseph Moore, quickly wrote a simple song for his organist, Franz Gruber, to set to guitar so that they would have something to sing on Christmas Eve. A detail that you might know comes from the complete book of hymns. The hymn might have remained an obscure alpine folk song if it weren't for the organ repairman. A few days after Christmas, he got a copy of the song and began sharing it with others. Soon, touring groups began to sing it in concerts, spreading its popularity even further. Today, it is one of the most beloved of all Christmas songs. Our second carol in this bracket, What Child Is This?, is written by English hymn writer William Chatterton Dix. He became very depressed due to a long illness, and surprisingly, many of his best-loved hymns were written during this time. What Child Is This? Is one of his most popular. Like Away in a Manger and Mary's Child, and our last carol in this bracket, Infant Holy, What Child Is This? Contrasts the child in a stable laid in a feed trough with the idea that this child is God among us, ruler of the universe. Infant Holy was originally a Polish carol which has been sung in English since the 1920s, and it goes to its original Polish tune. We begin though with 3 verses of Silent Night.
The first of the carols in this bracket, Angels from the Realms of Glory, was written by James Montgomery. It is the first of 5 carols in 2 brackets about the shepherds and the angels. The first announcement that God had become one of us to bridge the gap between heaven and earth was not to priests, ministers, kings or head of states, but to shepherds, the bogans of their day. There is nothing in this hymn to suggest that Montgomery was a radical, jailed twice for his political writing. But he was a great advocate for and supporter of the needy in the community. Like the angels, he also loved the bogans of his day. Charles Wesley wrote over 4,000 hymns, and 41 of them are in our hymn book. Hark the Herald Angels Sing is perhaps the best known. Wesley's hymns are so popular 250 years later because they appeal to both our emotions and our minds as well as the Bible. The companion to the hymn book identifies 14 Bible references in this carol alone. This carol, like many, is about the full significance of Jesus' life, not merely Christmas Day. Well summed up in the line in the final verse, Jesus was born that we no more may die. The last carol in this bracket is a traditional French carol. It is one of the most joyful of all carols, because it encourages us to sing with the angels as they celebrate the birth of Jesus. Glory to God in the highest is the meaning of the Latin phrase, Gloria in excelsis Deo. Let's begin with Angels from the Realms of Glory.
Amen.
Our next two carols are simple retellings of the shepherd's story. The first, While Shepherds Watched Their Flocks by Night, dates back to 1700 and was written by two hymn writers who became very unpopular for their modernising of the Psalms. Our organist, John Weir, following a long tradition, sometimes calls this carol While Shepherds Washed Their Socks by Night. And it has caused our previous minister, Scott Bormond, to accidentally introduce it as that. One Christmas, thinking about the washing of socks by night, I burst out laughing in the second last verse when I was tempted to sing, "Thus spake the seraph, and forthwith appeared a shining thong." The Shepherd's Dream is our only Australian carol for today. It's based on the Aussie folk song, The Drover's Dream, and comes from the pen of Robin Mann. It uses a lot of Australian imagery, humour and slang. It's a good bit of fun. But first we sing 4 verses of While Shepherds Washed Their Socks by Night. And watch out for the shining thong.
Noel is French for Christmas and probably means news or maybe birth. It can also mean carol. So the opening lines of this French carol, the first Noel, mean the first news of the birth of Jesus was sung to some poor shepherds out minding their sheep. We might think this carol is about the shepherds, but 4 of the 6 verses are about the wise men and the star, and the notion that the baby in the feed trough is the king not only of Israel, but of all creation. The second carol in this bracket is also our second carol by William Chatterton Dix. It too is about the wise men. As mentioned earlier, Dix wrote many of his best loved hymns when ill. The complete book of hymns says, Dix became ill and could not go to church. While he was home in bed, he decided to write a new Christmas carol, one that applied the message of the wise men to people of his day. In his carol, instead of focusing on the costliness of the Magi's gifts, he emphasised their finding what they sought and their worship of the Christ child, the pattern of the wise men, following, adoring, giving. It is a pattern that is just as relevant today as it was then. Let's sing first the first Noel. little town of Bethlehem is many people's favourite, including Reverend Andrew's. It speaks of the birth of Jesus to the town of Bethlehem like it is a person. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in you tonight. The final verse tells us that the hope brought by Jesus wasn't just born 2,000 years ago, it can still be born in us today. For God imparts to human hearts the blessing of his heaven. It Came Upon a Midnight Clear was written by Edmund Sears in 1849. Writing during a period of personal melancholy and with news of revolution in Europe and the United States war with Mexico fresh in his mind, Sears portrayed the world as dark, full of sin and strife, and not hearing the Christmas message. And yet, it concludes with a message of hope and echoes the ideas of carols like Joy to the World, O Holy Night, and the Holy City. For lo, the days are hastening on, by prophet bards foretold, when with the ever-circling years comes round the age of gold, when peace shall over all the earth its ancient splendours fling, and the whole world send back the song which now the angels sing. Let's all sing O Little Town of Bethlehem.
Silence
like to just bring a few thank yous to John Weir, of course, who's played really wonderfully on the organ for us. John, with Eunice and myself, with a little committee who organised this afternoon's event. So thanks to Eunice as well. Thanks to Sherry, and assisted by Norma, who had to sort out the ticketing, this whole ticket and allocated seating thing we have to do to kind of get more than about 40 people in the building. So thank you to them. And also thanks to Chris Dunn, who's done all the technical work for us up on the heights, as it were. We don't have angels, but we do have Chris, who's our technical angel. So Chris, and the other Chris Netherwood, thank you so much, Chris, for assisting with the narration today, or with the emceeing. And of course, wouldn't be any point doing this without all of you singing along so wonderfully. So thank you for being here and singing in good voice. Next slide, I think. Thanks, Chris. Sadly, the Bushley Uniting Church will be closing next Sunday at 6 p.m, but it will also be the final carol service there, as well as being the closing service. You're invited to come to that, but of course your own churches may have other carol events on, so please keep your eyes open for them. Similarly, your own churches, if you're not part of our church, will have Christmas Day services, but ours is 7 a.m, but if you don't want to do 7 a.m, you can do 7 p.m. the previous night on Christmas Eve. Or you can go up the hill to Mount Morgan. A couple of our Mount Morgan members are here at 9 a.m. On Christmas Day. But of course, remember, your own churches will have their services if you're from another church or have a connection with another church. And that's another opportunity to sing some wonderful carols. So this is the next hymn is the one for which we might stand, but Chris is going to bring us its introduction.
Our last carol is Isaac Watts' wonderful hymn, Joy to the World. This carol was actually never written as a Christmas song, but is based on Psalm 98. In verse 4 of the psalm, we hear, "Make a joyful noise to the Lord. All the earth, break forth into joyous song and sing praises." We sing joy to the world before and during Christmas because in Jesus, God the Lord has come among us in the stable in Bethlehem. By Lake Galilee in ancient Israel, on the cross at Calvary, and in our hearts by the Spirit. We also look forward to a time when God will make all things new, ruling with truth and grace. At that time, all the peoples of the earth will reflect the wonders of his love. Can we stand and sing the song?
thank you for joining us.